It has now been 2 years since the horrendous terrorist attacks by Hamas on Israel on October 7, 2023. But for the first time over these last 2 years, we can see the light at the end of a very dark tunnel. We saw that 20 Israeli hostages returned home to their families after more than 2 years held captive by Hamas in Gaza. A very joyful and emotional day, even if there are still bodies of deceased hostages that are not being delivered to their families for burial. Which brings us to the theme of this month's European report. Will we now finally see peace and normalization between Israel and our Arab neighbors, or will the conflict continue? This is today's question. And if we want to prepare for peace and normalization in the Middle East, what would be the eventual role of the European Union? How can the EU best use its influence to achieve this goal? Joining us in the program this month here in the European Parliament is newly elected MEP Kristoffer from Denmark, a member of the Conservatives and Reformists political group, and as always, Tomas Sandell, founding director of the European Coalition for Israel. My name is Yossi Lempkowicz from European Jewish Press and Europe-Israel Press Association. This is the European Report. Before all, I would like to ask both of you, how did you leave the release of the 20 Israeli hostages? MEP Storm.
Sorry, I was just having my mind actually in Israel, thinking about the hostages while you were speaking. So sorry, I was not prepared. But to be honest, I'm so happy to be able to see what have been doing the last couple of days. To see the happiness of the families, to see how the people of Israel have been able to trust in the future again. But I see this 20 hostages as a symbol of the future, and a symbol of now we have the chance to actually begin to talk about peace and talk about the future, because it was not possible at the time when it was still in Gaza and captured by Hamas. But now we have this new beginning. So I really think it's wonderful, and I hope it can be the start of new times.
Tomas Sandell, the same question for you.
Well, thank you, Yossi, for asking. I realized my name is Thomas. In the Bible, Thomas was the man with little faith, so I have to see to believe. And so when I heard the agreement being signed, I couldn't really take it in. But when I saw the hostages on Monday, I was in my hotel room, and I have to publicly confess, I cried like a baby. And it means that, you know, you've been living subconsciously with this situation, like so many others. The Jewish community around the world, of course, but I think, again, as a colleague said here, you know, with many others who feel for Israel. And it was so emotional. It was so emotional. It wasn't superficial joy. It was very bittersweet, because you think back to what really happened. And yesterday here in the European Parliament, there was a screening, just the short clips from October 7. And when you can't unsee those moments. And this is something we'll have to live with. You know, the healing process will only start. It won't be easy, but obviously this is a day of great joy to have the hostages back. I think it's fantastic.
You mean we cannot forget 7th of October?
We cannot forget, and you know what we've seen will always be there, and we have to. There are many difficult questions that comes to mind, but I think that is for another day.
If I may, it's also important that we don't do it, but we don't forget it, and that we keep remember. First of all, to honor all the people who died at the 7th of October, all the family who have made huge losses that day, but also to show the world, to show people what horror Israel is fighting against, and what kind of people there is living in Gaza who wants to destroy civilians in another country just because of their faith. I think it's very important. So we need to find a good way to honor the 7th of October, not only for now when the war was active, but also in the years to come, because it's very important. I think it's very important to keep telling the people of the West this horror lives in the people of Gaza, and it can come back if we don't act and if we don't find a way to strangle it. And so, because of that, I think it's very important that we keep that in mind.
MEP Storm, you are a new member of the European Parliament, were elected last year, but you have already taken part in a number of conferences related to Israel and the Middle East, and also in relations to the rise of anti-Semitism in Europe since October 7. Can you explain to our viewers what make you prioritize these issues when so many of your colleagues in the European Parliament are still remaining silent?
Yeah, I cannot tell you why my colleagues are remaining silent. I think it's a shame, and I feel ashamed of them, actually. I think it's my duty to stand up against people who are threatened, and the Jewish people are threatened, not only in Israel, but also in Europe. And if I don't do anything and just watch the bad development of the Jewish people in Europe, I will not be able to look myself in the mirror in the morning. Now I'm so lucky that the Danish people have given me a mandate to be here in the European Parliament, and I think it's my duty to use that mandate to help the people who actually need the support from this house. So that's the main reason.
And I saw that you hosted a reception in the European Parliament for the Rosh Hashanah.
Yes, for example, I have been hosting several of events and to show my support and to try to reach out to my colleagues and try to get them to some of the events, to hear speakers, stakeholders, to come and tell the other side of the story, not only the story from the streets where people are yelling and throwing stones, but actually the true story, the one who have been there, who have been in the kibbutz, people who have lived in Israel can tell what they have experienced. I think it's much more important than listen to all the troublemakers outside.
Tomas Sandell, you have just returned from a historic week at the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly. You have been invited to the General Assembly Hall. Can you please, for viewers, share some of the highlights of this special week?
Mm-hmm. Yes, of course, what we saw unfolding just a few days ago with the release of the hostages to a large extent, the preparations were made, at the sidelines of this 80th session of the general debate. So one had the sense of history in making while one were there in the UN General Assembly. I think there are three speeches that stands out when I'm looking back. Obviously, the speech of the US President, which I thought was phenomenal. And looking back, because we were there during his first presidency, and when we look at the optics, how he was ridiculed and people did not take him, seriously. When you looked at the optics, the people listening this time, it was such a completely different atmosphere. And because I think Trump was right in so many different ways. That was obviously one of the highlights. The other highlight, and I was, as you mentioned, honored to be invited to listen to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu with a small Israeli delegation, and I felt honored, not being Jewish myself, to be included. And that again was really a moral benchmark as to where we are today as an international community. But the third one was quite interesting, and that was the president of Indonesia, who, leading the country with the largest Muslim population, who spoke so warmly and passionately about Israel and said, we have to make sure that there is peace in Israel. We have to think about the safety and security of Israel also. And I think that was also a precursor to what we saw in Egypt, because he was there. And now we live in this bizarre situation. The only similar thing I can think of is the fall of the Berlin Wall, where all of a sudden everything seems to be possible. Pakistan considering normalization with Israel, Indonesia, Lebanon, Syria, you name it. And but my point is that Syria, of course, the list goes on. But the 80th session of the general debate was very important, not in what was said publicly, but what was happening, at the sidelines. And then, of course, on the Monday after, with the announcement of the peace proposal. So, I'm still exhilarated in a way of everything we've seen and that we are in the midst of right now.
MEP Storm, as a new member of the European Parliament, are you surprised of how Israel, which is the only democracy in the Middle East, is being treated by some of your colleagues? Among them, at least one was part of the flotilla that went to Gaza,
Yeah.
So why is there so much criticism of Israel here in Brussels within the EU institutions, while the situation in other countries, other parts of the world, like Syria, Nigeria, or Sudan, is almost completely ignored by these MEPs?
I am surprised, yes, but I'm more disappointed that I'm surprised, I'll say, because I knew that the left wing here in the parliament was like they are, because it's the same in Denmark. But I have suspected that the middle and the center-right part of the parliament would be more clear about the support of Israel. So when we have this vote back in July about condemning Israel, and it was a small majority who voted yes, I was very surprised actually, because I thought that
you've been sanctions.
Yeah, to sanctions against Israel.
We will speak about it later.
Okay, but I was very surprised to see that the center right in the parliament is divided, because. And I was very, very disappointed. I understand the left has always been like that, and we can just see at the streets who is the one who destroys the streets of Brussels, Copenhagen, and all the other capitals in Europe. It is mostly the lefties, and it's people from the area around, from the Middle East, and they are afraid of the voters. So of course they need to act like this. I don't know why socialism and anti-Semitism goes that well hand in hand, but it does, and it's actually threatened me a little bit, because it's strange that two ideologies that should be very divided is that close to each other, and maybe someone should have a look at that. But why it is like that? And to go back to what I said earlier, that's one of the reasons I think it's very important for an MEP like me to keep continuing doing the events like I have been doing, inviting speakers to the parliament, try to convince some of my colleagues to come and listen and maybe open their eyes and see it's not like you hear on the streets.
Tomas, Sandell, a lot has changed since French President Macron on Monday, 22nd of September, hosted what he thought would be a historic UN summit to solve the Middle East and present a two-state solution by recognizing a Palestinian state. How would you describe the new situation in the Middle East today on 13th of October? Are you today more hopeful than before the United General Assembly that the war is ending now and that 20 living hostages have been brought back to their families after more than 2 years? Are you more optimistic today?
I'm optimistic today on the 15th of October. I hope that optimism will remain throughout the week and throughout the month. Obviously, you know, I have written articles where I said that this is a lifeline to Israel as well, because what we saw happening, and you describe the situation with the mounting pressure in Europe, which is not only from the left, but increasingly also from the center and center right. The idea was that this Macron conference would be the final nail in that coffin to as they described, an irreversible, unconditional path to statehood. Which is completely irrational. You can't have anything irreversible, you can't have anything unconditional. So the Monday was, of course, the game changer, where to everyone's surprise, it was the US president who brought together the stakeholders and presented a credible plan. And I think two things that we can already say that has changed because of this plan. One is, of course, the living hostages are back. I mean, it's amazing. It means militarily that the situation is completely new. There's a promise from Trump's side, and I think also from the rest of the signatories that, if they don't behave, Israel has the right to go in to dismantle Hamas. Trump said it just earlier today. That's one thing. The other thing is that there is a momentum now in the Arab world. There is an expectancy of moving in a certain direction for normalization. This will not disappear easily, and I think the next few weeks and months will reveal how far it can go under these circumstances. But what we do know is that there's a very different dynamics right now than before the 29th of September. And I'm so grateful for all of that.
But there is still the Iranian issue. Iran is still an issue in the Middle East.
It's still an issue, but, and someone mentioned this, if we go back to the Berlin Wall, Soviet Union fell because it was weakened from outside and from inside. The same is true now for the Islamic Republic. Yeah.
They are more isolated now, Iran, because of the Arab country have agreed on this peace deal. And
yes.
So I 100% agree with you. I think there is some opportunities now that we haven't seen before.
Exactly.
MEP Storm, Denmark is currently chairing the European Council. And in this position, it is pushing, we mentioned this, pushing for sanctions and boycotts of Israel by the EU. At the same time, your Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, has refused to recognize a Palestinian state before it fulfills certain conditions and criteria for statehood. What is your own assessment of Denmark's role in the current conflict and towards Israel?
To be honest, I would like to say that my country is very important in this role, this situation, but I don't think Denmark's role is that important. Not even now when we have the presidency. We can see the peace conference in Egypt. Denmark was not invited. Why not? Because it was not necessary to have Denmark on at that meeting. So it doesn't mean anything for the situation who is in charge of the European Council, because nobody cares about that, to be honest. It's just some EU nonsense that we need to change that every 6 months. But I think that the Danish way of dealing with recognizing Palestine is a good way to do it, because in that way we give the people of Palestine a feeling that we recognize that we give them the opportunity to change. And say, if you do this and this and this and this and this, then we will stand by you and recognize your area as a state. But to be honest, the things that we say from Denmark that they'll need to live up to, it will take years for the Palestinian people to get there. If they even will get there, I'm not sure that they'll never be there, because some of the things that they say for the Danish government, and I support that part, is that they need to have a democracy in Palestine. We need to have a government that supports a two-state solution. We need to have a people who recognize Israel's right to exist and so on. And I don't believe that the Palestinians is ready to choose peace in their own states. Now we can just see what happened in Gaza. The moment Israel put back their forces, almost a civil war went out, and so it will take years for them to get there. But of course, if they change, why should we say no in front? But I don't believe that. I think it will take years for them to get ready, because right now there's nothing to recognize. It's not a real state. They don't have a government. They don't they cannot rule their own people. They cannot protect their borders and so on. So there's nothing to recognize. So it needs to take it step by step.
We mentioned this before. Should the European Union now withdraw remove its decision to sanction Israel?
Yes, of course they should.
Know that the deal has been signed and the ceasefire took effect. The topic, I know, will be discussed at the Foreign Affairs Council. Yeah. But do you think that EU-Israel relations can be reset?
I hope so, and I cannot see why it shouldn't. As I said earlier, I don't understand why the parliament was voting for these sanctions, but now the sanctions was because of the acts in Gaza. Now they have withdrawals, so now there's no reason to keep the sanctions. So if they do that, I think we have a huge problem. But I don't think that. I think common sense will have victory also in this house in this topic. I hope so, and I believe it.
Tomas, Sandell, Finland, your country, is another EU member state which has not recognized a Palestinian state. Can you please give us an update from your own home country, the situation?
Yeah, there was a lot of pressure ahead of the UN General Assembly. The president went out and said that personally he would favor a recognition, but he knew that this was something that had to be agreed by the government. The government was split, and there was even a vote of non-confidence in the parliament on this issue, which just shows the symbolic importance of an issue which, an ordinary Finn, it doesn't matter one way or another, if there's a recognition or not. But again, I think the 47th President of the United States, he settled that questions, at least for a foreseeable future. So, and I think that was an embarrassment for the European leaders, with all the prestige and effort that they put into a recognition. If you look at the optics from Egypt and you see how they were placed, and you see these very self-important European leaders somewhere in the margin, you can hardly see them on the picture. They didn't look very happy, by the way. And I think rightfully so, because this path of pushing a Palestinian state, irreversible, it didn't lead anywhere. And so, as Kristoffer says, the same is true for Finland as for Denmark. We are small countries, but we all like to pretend that we are bigger and more important than we are. So thankfully, Finland and Denmark remains the countries in the Scandinavia which have not recognized the Palestinian state. But I always mention this fact when they look at the numbers and say we have so and so many member states recognizing a Palestinian state, and said, well, Soviet Union was the first one, and then you had all the communist countries. So, you know, if you want to be on the right side of history, in this case, it was the Soviet Union who was on the right side of history. They were not, and we should learn from that.
Yeah, true.
Finally, MEP Storm, what are your own hopes and dreams for the future of the Middle East? What do you personally think of the 20-point Trump peace plan, peace initiative, and how can the EU use its own power and resources to create this new Middle East? What is your own thinking about this?
First of all, I hope that he will succeed with this peace plan. Of course, it will not all of the topics will go through, but I hope that in general this peace plan will go through, because it's actually very good. And I have said from the beginning, if we want to have a more stable Middle East, if we want some kind of peace in the Middle East, we need to have the Arab countries, we need to have Turkey on board, we need to be a part of the peace between the Israel people and the Palestinians. And that's what we are seeing now. So I think that's great. And I think that is completely necessary that we work in the same direction. My dream is that what we will see for the next years is more peace in Israel, that the Israeli people don't have to be afraid of rockets coming in from the borders of Palestine or from Yemen or Iran and whatsoever country who wants to attack them. And I believe that, because I believe that with this plan, Trump have managed to isolate the few countries who didn't want to be a part of this, like Iran. And in that way, it is much easier to create a stable area in the world. So I believe maybe not 100% peace as we know from other parts of the world, but at least much more stabilized. And then in the future, it can lead to real peace. I hope that, and I believe.
That was all for this month's edition of the European Report. Thank you both to MEP Kristoffer Storm and Tomas Sandell for this discussion in a time of great achievement and hope. To our readers, as always, if you like our program, please feel free to share the YouTube link with your friends and colleagues. My name is Yossi Lempkowicz, and this has been the European Report. See you again next month.